very briefly um, address the social acceptability of animal research in the past and now. I actually wrote a whole article on it, which I couldn't possibly condense in such a short time. But I will focus on what I think is the most important, and the main take-home message from this short talk is that the attitudes that we see nowadays are exactly the same as the ones we saw 100 or 200 years ago. It just depends on how they are distributed, so on how many oppose it, how many approve animal research, because the motivations themselves, basically, from a philosophical, moral standpoint, are approximately the same. And this is important because knowing the history, how this worked, how people look at animal research might help us understand and frame attitudes and views now. So what are European citizens' attitudes to animal research? Well, nobody knows actually nowadays, because the last Eurobarometer survey at European level was carried out in 2009. What we knew from this Eurobarometer is that there were marked country differences, so approval varied anywhere between 49% to 81%, and that species mattered. So they had a question on whether people would approve of experiments for biomedical purposes on mice, and then another on primates or dogs, and the level of approval shifted quite considerably. So this we know, but these are numbers from 2009, published in 2010. There are other surveys that indicate that this approval might be higher in women, younger people, in people with a humanities background, go figure, but also if there is low transparency or low perception. I think this is a word people are now getting more accustomed to, of animal research, and if it is not done for biomedical purposes, and if animals suffer, or if animals suffer to a greater extent. So, but are the views that we hold today any different than they were in the past? Well, one of my actually favorite works of art is an experiment on a bird in an air pump by Joseph Wright. And here you have 10 people in this picture, and a lot is going on. But I would just want to bring your attention that we have all or most of the views regarding animal research that we see today. This was painted in 1768. So this is the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. So we have this kind of a traveling lecturer, in a way, making a demonstration. This was relatively common back in England. And so we could call this, in a way, dissemination of results of what was an achievement at the time, which was the air pump. We see excitement, this boy that can't even sit still. We have the indifference from these lovers. We have the father that actually probably paid for all of this, urging the children who are either fearful or in absolute shock, and saying, okay, I paid for this, this is important, you looked at this because this is science. You have curiosity from the boy, which some say it's actually a young version of the painter itself. You have what some call the philosopher here reflecting, and you have some interest here from this chap here, who is actually, the person depicted is actually Charles Darwin's grandfather, Erasmus Darwin. But there's a lot more going on. So what are the materials and methods that are portrayed here? So you have the pneumatic pump that sucks out all the air from the campanula here, and you have the animal. So this is an animal experiment. So you have a cockatoo, a very expensive animal. This is an import, meaning that it might actually be the pet from the household, and you have someone counting the time. So it's really scientific. But there are also alternatives, and you can see that you have a straw and liquid. And of course, if you pull the straw, you create the negative pressure. So you create vacuum and the liquid would rise. You have a candle snuffer that basically, what does it do? You take out the air and the candle goes out. You have a thermometer that works on alcohol and mercury, but the reason why it can expand is because there's vacuum inside. You have the Motherberg hemispheres here, which are two semi-spheres. It's not hemispheres, it's hemispheres. I apologize for that. And if you connect them and suck out the air from within, you just can't move them apart because the vacuum inside, you have vacuum inside, and you have the atmospheric pressure on the outside. And you have here in this jar, which is actually the centerpiece, lungs of an animal conserved here in this liquid, and a straw also to blow on them and see them inflate and that sort of thing. So this is what we would call alternatives to the experiment. So the animal is still alive. So this captures that moment. And actually you have the lecturer pointing to the alternatives, looking at us, staring at us, while holding the animal. You have this chap here saying, look at this. And these are in the center. The hand is in the center of the painting. This is on the hand of the father is also on the center, in the midline. This is of course, the source of light, the alternative here that we have. So one could almost feel the researcher looking at the philosopher looking at all of this, and is not looking at the experiment itself because he's holding his spectacles in his hand and asking, is this worth it? And the painter as well, staring at us, asking us, is it worth it? So these are basically the same attitudes we find today. So this is from Lund et al. And they saw that basically people look at the benefits and the harms to animals. Some look only at the harms here on the top. So these are disapprovers and will stay disapprovers, will not experience any or acknowledge any ambivalence when confronted with it. So the initial attitude is either you're against or pro animal use. And if you are confronted with some extra information, you might end up having these three attitudes: disapprovers, reserved, and approvers. Just wanted to highlight that all of those who approved is provided there are no alternatives and that animals are respected. So it always depends. So most people conditionally accept animal research provided it aimed at gaining relevant scientific knowledge or improving health. All efforts are made in order to minimize harm, and that these conditions are enforced by legislation and properly supervised. So approval, both now and in the past, depends on a number of factors. The higher approval for biomedical research actually raises issues for basic research, so we should also highlight that basic research is also important, and that all efforts are made in order to minimize harm to animals. And I ask of you, are we? Always? Everywhere? Because I have my own research showing that often, and quite unfortunately, this is not the case. And again, if these conditions are enforced by legislation and properly supervised, I asked, is it? Always and everywhere. So we run on a social license that warrants public trust that our work is relevant, competent, and ethical. Now, 200 years ago, 100 years ago, 120, 200 years in the future. Thank you for listening.